My name is Julia Reynolds. I am 41, and until recently I lived in Austin, Texas, where I held the position of Senior Systems Architect at the pharmaceutical company BioTrack Solutions. 3 years of my life, filled with sleepless nights, drafts, builds, and endless revisions, were devoted to creating a complex integration platform. It became the invisible bridge that connected clinical trials, applications for approval of new drugs, and customer control interfaces. Every part of it was designed with clockwork precision, and every cog mattered. It was my brainchild, alive, breathing, evolving. No one understood her the way I did. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. That morning, I arrived at work a little earlier, as usual, parked on the third level of the concrete garage and went up the stairs, feeling the coffee in the thermocup taste bitter, not because I was too dry, but because I didn't sleep well. It's amazing how restless sleep can color even your favorite habits. There was something about this day that immediately seemed wrong. The air seemed heavier, the morning light dimmed even with a clear sky, and the faces of colleagues were a little more cautious than usual. I entered the office, as always, the first among my team, and then I noticed a postcard on the table. "Happy birthday, Julia." Read the inscription on the cover, decorated with gold stars. Inside are the signatures of my colleagues, some with warmth, some out of politeness. I smiled, more out of inertia. Over the years, I've learned to distinguish sincere engagement from corporate formality, but it was still nice to know that someone took a minute to remember. I sat down, turned on the monitor, took a sip of the cooling coffee, and at that moment the internal messenger rang. "Will you come to my place for a few minutes?" Blake wrote briefly. He has been my immediate supervisor since the previous director resigned. In the past, he was a salesperson with a superficial understanding of system architecture, but with an undoubted grasp. To me, he seemed too easy on the upswing for the position he held, but I tried not to judge. He might not understand the technological essence, but he was polite, and we had an even relationship. I took my laptop with me, a habit I've developed over the years, always be ready to show, explain, and prove. He met me at the door of his office with an almost casual smile and invited me to sit down. There were 2 cups of coffee on his table. One was obviously meant for me. It was alarming. Blake was rarely so helpful. "First of all, happy birthday, Julia," he said, sitting down across from her and steepling his fingers. "I hope you have something planned after work today." "It's nothing special. Maybe dinner with my sister." "Why are you asking?" He looked down for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts, and then looked up, polite but distant. "We have had several structural changes in the team. And I have to inform you that today is your last day at BioTrack." At first I didn't understand. The words pushed away from consciousness, not finding the usual connections in it. I blinked at him. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "We reviewed the organizational model," he continued, almost in a businesslike manner, and came to the conclusion that the position of senior architect can be optimized. Jamie has been with the company for 6 months now. You've trained her well, and now she's able to take on most of the operational work. Besides, we can pay her half as much. It's just business, Julia. It's nothing personal. It's nothing personal." Those words hit harder than any accusation. I looked at him as if I had never seen him before. Behind him, through the window, is the blue sky, blurring in a haze of Texas heat. Suddenly, everything seemed unreal: the coffee warming his palms, the leather armchair, the soft carpet under his feet, even his own name coming out of his mouth. Everything lost weight and meaning. "Are you serious?" I finally whispered. He nodded. "Here's the severance agreement. 2 weeks of salary, as expected. I need you to sign it before the end of the day and leave your pass and all passwords." I didn't take the papers. I didn't touch them. She just stood up. I knew that if I stayed even for a second, would start screaming, destroying the fragile facade behind which the shock was hiding. I couldn't break down now. Not in front of him. I walked in the hallway as if in a dream. As I walked past the open doors of the offices, I felt glances at me, short, full of awkwardness. Someone knew. Someone didn't know, but they guessed. Everything was in its place on my desk: a laptop, a tablet, a glass bottle of water signed with my name. I started packing my things. My fingers were shaking violently. Jamie came over when I was about to close the bag. She looked confused, guilty. "Julia, I just found out. I swear, I didn't know." "It's okay," I said, without looking up. "Here. You'll need it." I handed her my notebook, which was thick and battered, with bookmarks and my handwritten notes. She took it as if it was burning. The system message was flashing on the laptop screen, the synchronization error of the 317D module. I opened my mouth to explain what to do with her, but at that moment Blake appeared in the doorway. "It's all right. Jamie can handle it," he said with that same easy, carefree confidence that had suddenly become unbearably false. I looked at Jamie, at my empty desk, at the postcards still lying in the corner. Then he looked at the door. My legs obeyed, and I went out. Downstairs, at the reception, the air seemed heavy and stagnant. There's no one to say goodbye to. No one stood up or looked up. I pressed the elevator button and, standing in its cramped, mirrored interior, for the first time all day I allowed myself to exhale slowly. It's all over. Or, it was just beginning. I woke up the next morning not to the sound of an alarm clock, but to the vibration of my phone, which was shaking on the bedside table, as if trying to escape from its own shell. It took me a moment to figure out what was going on. My eyes hadn't opened yet, but my brain was already picking up the familiar tones of incoming notifications. When I finally picked up the phone, the screen was glowing with the blue glow of LinkedIn, dozens, maybe hundreds, of new notifications. Messages, invitations, expressions of sympathy. My heart sank when I read the first one: "Julia, I just found out. It's horrible. If anything, know that you are respected. Hold on." Then there's another one: "You're one of the best architects I've ever worked with. Don't let them break you." I scrolled down, feeling the growing knot in my throat constrict. The dismissal, it turns out, spread across the industry faster than I had time to cool off from the very fact. Someone obviously couldn't resist gossiping, and now my professional fate was being discussed on the sidelines, where compliments to my platform and thanks for nightly edits in client systems were once heard. I got out of bed, as if by force. The day started out slow and sticky. The smell of last night's dinner was still in the kitchen, chicken with thyme, which I barely touched. I poured myself a cup of coffee, resting my hip on the edge of the counter, and turned on my laptop. First of all, a resume. It's been in need of updating for a long time, but we haven't gotten around to it. Now we've reached it. For half an hour, I rearranged the blocks, added achievements, and reread the wording, as if these lines contain my justification to the world. Then there are job sites, applications, and cover letters. Automatic phrases, memorized words. I tried to concentrate, but my head kept returning to yesterday morning, to the postcard, to Blake's handshake, to the way he said nothing personal. In the late afternoon, when the sky outside the window began to tighten with an ashen haze, and the wind, like a warning, whispered in the frames, the bell rang. It wasn't the HR number, it wasn't the recruiter, it was Zach. "Julia? I'm sorry to bother you, but we're in trouble." His voice was strained, almost hoarse, like a man who hadn't slept for several nights in a row. One of the test modules, DRX 1429, started to malfunction after the last update. We tried everything that was in the documentation. But nothing helps. I sat down without taking the phone off my ear. I didn't even need to specify. I knew this module. It was one of the most sensitive parts of the entire architecture, a thin link between automatic validation blocks and manual requests from the external environment. Just before he was fired, he started issuing a warning, but I didn't have time to get to the bottom of the reason. The notification flashed on the screen when I was packing, but at that moment they didn't let me say a word. "What does Jamie say?" I asked, even though I had guessed the possible answer. "She thinks that you can just forcibly reset the base. Make a rollback, ignoring the control dependencies." I squeezed my eyes shut. "Absolutely not, Zach. This can damage not only the test base, but also affect the client panels. The whole system is built on cross-validation. If you destroy one pillar, everything will collapse." He was silent. "Have you turned on the manual confirmation mode on the secondary tables?" I did. "But there is no data. They are out of sync. Indexes lead nowhere." I straightened up. "Good. Let's do this. Log into the DRX 1429 module via the console, open the latest update log and look at the timestamps. We will compare them with the verification logs. If they do not match, we will reconstruct the chain manually. I'll tell you step by step." He nodded, and we started. I didn't look at the clock. I didn't think that I didn't have to do this. I didn't even think about Blake. At that moment, there was only the system, my system, which I could not abandon, even if it no longer belonged to me. We restored the base an hour later. I could hear the genuine relief in Zach's voice, almost childlike joy. He thanked me, and when I hung up, I felt not pride, but a strange, almost painful regret, as if I had entrusted my child to someone, and then heard that he had not been fed. Less than 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. Another developer. The same story. "There is a malfunction in the connection module with the control unit." Another call. And more. It was like I had become a hotline for help, even though I no longer had anything to do with them. But how could you be silent when what you had been building for years was crumbling? When the screen reflected an incoming call for the 4th time, Blake's name, I pressed reject. I knew why he was calling. He's already figured out that he can't handle it without me. There was a logic to the way the system responded to external calls that Jamie simply couldn't know. Not because she was a bad specialist, but because there was a philosophy behind the architecture. It couldn't be learned in 6 months. The next morning, around 9, I received a letter from him. "Julia, let's meet. It's urgent." No apologies, no explanations. Just empty politeness. But I replied by agreeing. Deep down, I already knew what would be offered. We met in the cafeteria next to the office. He looked tired and visibly aged. He stopped wearing a tie. It was his personal stress barometer. "I want you to come back," he said, not looking into her eyes. "As a consultant. We are not coping. You can see for yourself. Name the conditions." I paused. My chest felt empty, like an abandoned waiting room. No anger, no revenge, just fatigue. $300 an hour. At least 40 hours. Full access to all modules. And autonomy. I don't take orders from anyone except for technical necessities. He nodded almost immediately. No haggling. Consider it a deal. When I left the cafeteria, the sky was clear again. The air is cool. And for the first time in 2 days, I felt that everything was just beginning. I returned to the BioTrack office with a feeling that was difficult to pinpoint. It was neither a joy nor a satisfaction, much less a triumph. Rather, it's a mixture of concentration and detachment, like a doctor who has been called to an urgent operation at a clinic where he was fired the day before. The space seemed almost alien. The walls were the same, the screens were the same, the familiar smell of coffee from vending machines in the hallway. Everything was in place, but the sense of belonging had disappeared. It was like I was looking at everything through glass. My colleagues greeted me with relief, and it was almost palpable, like a wave that swept through the hall. Someone's brief glances, someone's barely noticeable nods, even someone muttered, "Thank God." It wasn't hostility, it was the expectation of salvation. Jamie wasn't in the office. I asked about it casually, not really hoping for an answer, but Blake muttered without looking at me. "She's sick. Stress, apparently. Everyone's nerves are on edge right now." He tried to look neutral, but his eyes betrayed his anxiety. The professional horror of a man who found himself in the midst of a failure that he had provoked, and who was now forced to admit his dependence on the very system that he wanted to simplify to the point of absurdity. I immediately immersed myself in my work. The first thing that caught my eye was the chaotic, superficial edits made without understanding the architecture. Intermediate checks were removed, security triggers were disabled, and connections between tables were disrupted, as if someone was trying to simplify the bridge by sawing through the load-bearing beams to make it look lighter. And all this in an area where data accuracy meant not just efficiency, but the safety of people whose clinical data passed through our platform. A wave of quiet, restrained rage swept over me, but I gritted my teeth and began to repair the knots one by one. Code is my only language in this situation. I talked to the system through him, and she responded. By evening, I had managed to stabilize one of the most critical components, the regulatory approval module. The system began to respond predictably, and the synchronization schedules were again aligned in an even grid. I wasn't deluding myself. There was still a lot of work ahead, but I felt we came out of the tailspin. That alone was enough to regain control. When I was about to leave, Blake came over again. His manner of behaving with restraint, almost casual, did not deceive me. "Listen, Julia," he began, lowering his voice, "I'd like to discuss something with you." Unofficially. I straightened up, folding my arms on the table. "I'm listening. We at the company understand the value you represent. And we want to invite you back. On a permanent basis. With a raise. Higher position, salary review. We need you, that's obvious." I was silent. Not because she was thinking about her answer, but because she needed this pause so as not to respond too quickly. Not too harsh. He continued. "Of course, we need to complete the recovery first, but I hope you'll consider our offer." I didn't answer. I just picked up my bag and headed for the exit. But already on the threshold, passing by his desk, I noticed a laptop screen out of the corner of my eye. A letter was open on it. The topic is the transition plan. It was from Victoria, the executive director. I didn't have time to read everything, but a few words managed to be imprinted in my memory. This time, document everything. We need stability after she leaves. After she left. They used me again, not as a specialist, not as part of a team, but as a tool. Fix it, document it, and transfer it. And leave. Only now, voluntarily, according to the script, when my role has already been spelled out. I went outside with my pulse pounding in my temples. They needed me not as a professional, but as the last chance to hold on to a crumbling structure until the next one arrived, young, cheap, and loyal. The next day, around noon, I received a text from Jamie. It's short. Almost apologetically, "Can we talk? Important. Only with you." Curiosity overcame irritation. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop across the street from the office. She was already sitting there when I arrived, with a cup of latte, but apparently she hadn't had a drink in a long time. His eyes are swollen, and there are shadows of lack of sleep under them. His fingers fiddled with the edge of the napkin. When I sat down, she looked up at me, and it was clear to me that she was scared. Strongly. For real. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice breaking. I didn't know who else to turn to. What happened? What happened to the system? It wasn't an accident. That is, partially, yes, But initially, everything didn't go wrong by itself. I stared at her without interrupting. She took a deep breath. Blake, he asked me to make changes to the verification modules himself. Remove unnecessary checks and disable backup triggers. He said it was just an optimization that you approved, but didn't have time to implement. I've never approved of anything like this, I said slowly, feeling a chill rise in my chest. I realized that later. But at that moment, he sounded so confident. And I thought, well, if you've talked to him, maybe it's true. I just followed the instructions. But when everything started to fall apart, I immediately told him that I needed to call you. He refused. He said it would look like an admission of guilt. He told me to improvise. That we can handle it. Show me. She took out her phone with trembling hands and opened the correspondence. His messages were very clear. Implement the changes, don't let her know. We need to remove the excess. Make it easier. Then, when the mistake started, his tone became more and more harsh. No calls to Julia. We are keeping the situation under control. Just roll it back. Her responses became increasingly panicked, but he didn't react. I stared at the screen, feeling the blood pounding in my ears. There was more than deception embedded in these lines. There was an obvious attempt to frame. His confidence that I was already out of the game gave him the freedom to manipulate. He wanted to simplify the system not because he believed in efficiency, but because he wanted to show that he was right and I was wrong. And when everything went wrong, he wanted Jamie to be the scapegoat. I looked up. Thanks for telling me. It changes a lot. She nodded, almost relieved. But I knew there was more to come. And now I had more than just access. I had a motive. And it's true. I was sitting in my rented apartment, at my laptop, in a dim room lit only by the pale glow of the screen and the streetlights outside the window, and I felt something more than anxiety thudding in my chest. It wasn't just tension, it wasn't just resentment or anger. It was a realization. A clear, crystal understanding of exactly how I was being used, how the trap was being set, and how my name was being erased from the future of the company I helped build. I saw the whole scheme, now not only architectural, but human. And in this scheme, Blake was not a stupid manager who got confused in the code. He was a manipulator, a cold-blooded strategist. He was not a grandmaster, but he was far from being a chess master. But he was a gambler, and he made a bet. He bet against me. I could no longer perceive everything that had happened as just a professional conflict. It was a betrayal disguised as a reorganization, and there was more than just a corporate motive behind it. It was personal. He tried to devalue my system, my principles, my name. And now that his calculations had failed, when his simplifications began to crack at the seams, he wanted to reuse me. But not as a partner anymore. As an external resource. And as soon as I document the recovery process, as soon as I build an architecture that can exist without me, he will get rid of me completely. I saw it in his eyes, in his letter, in the very tone of his sentences. He wanted to get the most out of it without paying the price. I turned on the audit server and started reconstructing the events of the last few weeks. The entire system stored logs, dates of changes, actions, accounts. At first glance, everything was clean. But I knew I needed to look deeper. And so, one by one, I began to see how the puzzle was coming together. Here is the administrative access activated off schedule. Here are the changes to the protection modules implemented bypassing the standard procedures. And here is the most important thing, the timestamps shifted retroactively. It was almost imperceptible if you didn't know where to look. But I knew. He didn't just implement the changes. He framed them as if they had been agreed upon a long time ago, as if they had passed through me. All his actions were framed with a hint of my approval, as if I knew that all this was happening and silently agreed. I uploaded the logs, archived them, copied them to an external drive, added a digital signature, and just in case, I sent a copy to my personal mailbox in encrypted form. I couldn't let this data disappear if my access was revoked tomorrow. But even this evidence was insufficient. I needed witnesses. Real people who can confirm that I didn't know, didn't approve, and didn't participate. I didn't doubt Jamie. Her confusion and fear were genuine. But her testimony alone might not be enough. I dialed Zach's number. He answered quickly. Julia? Everything is fine. Zach, I need to talk to you seriously. Did you know that Blake made changes to the system without my consent? I guessed it. After you left, strange orders started appearing. Jamie and I discussed it, but we weren't sure at the time. And now, well, I've seen what it's led to. Are you ready to confirm this officially? He paused. I could almost hear him gathering his courage. Yes. I must. You pulled us out when everything was falling apart. And he almost ruined the whole project. After the conversation, I felt my shoulders slumped slightly. It was the first real exhalation in days. I'm not alone. Now I had the evidence, and the support of those who saw everything from me inside. I opened the browser and found the contact of an independent compliance consultant at the FDA. Since our system processed data related to clinical trials, any deliberate interference with the architecture could entail not only reputational, but also legal consequences. An hour later, I was talking to a lawyer, an outwardly calm woman with an even voice that had a hint of steel in it. What you're describing is a serious violation, she said. If you can confirm log manipulation and actions performed without proper authorization, we are dealing with an attempt to conceal critical changes in the system. Especially when it comes to data for regulatory authorities. In this case, an investigation may be opened. I explained to her the essence of architecture, how exactly the changes affected the critical areas, and how an uncontrolled intervention could have ended. She asked a few more clarifying questions and finally said, You need to collect everything. Screenshots, logs, correspondence, internal reports. We need to be sure that the chain of events can be traced from the first intervention to the current consequences. If you have it, it can become the basis for contacting the regulatory authorities. When the conversation ended, I sat looking at the screen, which was filled with a series of windows, graphs, logs, screenshots, like evidence in court. It didn't matter if the trial was formal, I knew it was my game. And it wasn't just a name that was at stake. It was the truth. I remembered how a year ago, during a planning meeting, I defended the very part of the architecture that Blake was now trying to destroy. Then he said that I was overcomplicating things, that the market needs to be simpler, faster. And I said, sometimes the check takes an hour, but it saves weeks of recovery. We have no right to risk accuracy. He was nodding, but not listening. Even then, he didn't believe that the system was complicated. He just thought that I was making it so that it would seem irreplaceable. But he was wrong. The system was complicated because that's the reality. Because errors in clinical data cost lives. Because each link of the checks was built not for show, but as a result of experience, analysis, and mistakes. Now I didn't have to prove it with words. Prove it with facts. And I was ready. I didn't sleep that night. I printed out documents, sorted files, organized flash drives, and signed dates. The room was filled with the smell of paper and the hum of machinery. The silence of the street outside only emphasized the inner tension. Sometime near dawn, I got up, went to the window, opened it and breathed in the cool Texas air. A new day was already breaking out there, far beyond the horizon. I knew that when it started, I would have everything to turn the game around. Because I wasn't playing by their rules anymore. Monday morning enveloped the city in a thin haze, as if it did not want to witness what was coming. I left the house a little earlier than I needed to, not because I was in a hurry, but because I couldn't sit in silence anymore, where time was tripping too loudly. There was a thin dark blue folder on the passenger seat, neatly folded, with a zipper, as if it carried nothing but paper. But inside there was the truth, compressed into numbers, logs, and chronology. And with it, everything I had to say. The BioTrack office is not fully alive at this hour. People came into the lobby with half-finished coffee, with sticky eyes and phones in their hands. Those who recognized me turned away a little too quickly, pretending they hadn't noticed. Those who didn't know watched with interest, feeling something in the air, but having no words. I went up to the third floor and went straight to the conference room without waiting for an invitation. I knew they were waiting for me. Inside, Blake and director Victoria Hale were sitting at a wide glass table, immaculately put together, with immaculately smooth hair and an expression on her face that was supposed to mean benevolence, but betrayed tension. Nearby is a man in a gray suit with a laptop and a woman with a folder and an HR department badge. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. "Good morning," Victoria said, getting up. "Julia, thank you for coming. We are here to formally close your consulting contract and thank you for your help at a difficult time for the company." I nodded. She slowly walked over to the table and took 2 documents out of her bag. The first is the bill for the work done. The second one is a thin copy of what was in the folder on the passenger seat of my car. "Before we get down to the formalities," I said quietly, "I'd like you to familiarize yourself with these materials. I think they're interesting." I put the folder on the table and carefully undid the clasp. Victoria frowned, Blake lowered his eyes, and then, as if in answer to an unspoken question, the conference room door opened again. Jamie and Zach entered, both in business clothes, but with expressions that spoke more of inner determination than protocol. Behind them are 2 men dressed in severe dark suits. One is tall, with the bearing of a former military man, the other is dry, with a folder similar to mine. They didn't introduce themselves. I did it for them. "They're representatives of the FDA," I said calmly. "They are interested in the events that took place in your system last week." A moment of absolute silence. Blake turned pale, his face frozen, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. Victoria opened her mouth to protest, but before she could, one of the agents spoke up. "Gentlemen," he began, without raising his voice, but with such clarity that he did not want to interrupt, "interference with the data management system related to clinical trials is within our jurisdiction. We have received a notification and preliminary evidence indicating unauthorized changes that potentially violate security protocols and regulatory reporting." He sat down. I took out copies of the document from the folder, one by one, architectural diagrams, highlighted modification zones, a list of logical connection violations, log files with fake timestamps, screenshots of correspondence between Blake and Jamie. The last one was my own sworn report. I laid them out in front of each participant in the meeting. "This is a chronology. This is a technical justification. This is the human factor." I pointed to the printout of the messages. I left the company, and behind my back they implemented optimizations that violate the architecture of the system. When everything collapsed, they brought me back. But not to admit a mistake, but to use it again. Only now, to document every step, to make the system manageable even for those who do not understand how it works. And then to exclude me completely. Victoria opened her mouth, but the agent spoke again. "These documents have already been registered," he said without turning around. "We are initiating a check. It's not just about reputation, but also about possible liability for false reports in clinical trials. If it is found that the changes were made without a procedural sanction, the company may face consequences." Everything that happened next, I perceived as through cotton wool. Victoria tried to save face by talking about an internal investigation and an incomplete understanding of the essence of the changes. Blake was silent. He sat with his lips pressed together, and only his fingers trembled slightly. I saw him realize that everything was out of control. His game is over. His bet didn't play out. Besides, I added, interrupting the pause, I've accepted an offer from Metasphere Labs. I'm going to work tomorrow. My first project will be to implement a migration plan for client data from your platform to a more reliable, compliant architecture. We have already received requests from 2 companies that previously worked with you. Victoria's tone changed. The warmth disappeared, even a hint of politeness disappeared. Her face was hard, her voice cutting. You can't do that. We have valid contracts, and we are protected by data integrity provisions. You violated those provisions, I replied. My lawyer has already reviewed the contracts. The provisions became invalid the moment you started modifications without authorization and violated reporting to regulators. It's only a matter of time before your clients terminate the contract. Zach sat with his back straight, Jamie with eyes full of anxiety, but now also of relief. She was no longer alone. I wasn't alone anymore. We didn't just speak for ourselves. We spoke for the system. To those who built it with the belief that architecture is not just code. This is trust. When the meeting was over and I headed for the exit, no one tried to stop me. I turned around only once. I looked at the folder left on the table. It remained open, the pages like wounds. But there was truth in them now. And that was enough. A year has passed. 12 months, 365 days, each of which began with the same look at the horizon, at my own reflection in the glass, at a world in which I no longer had to prove that I was in my place. I'm sitting in a corner office on the 30th floor of a building in the heart of Chicago, where even in winter the gray river feels like flowing steel, and the wind doesn't just cut my cheeks, it tests my strength. Snow is slowly swirling outside the window, covering the city with a thin veil, almost transparent, but adamant. Like the layers of the architecture I'm designing now, invisible but supporting. There's a quarterly report on the table in front of me. I will carefully reset the scanned pages, which I have been flipping through for the second time, not because I am looking for mistakes, but because I still cannot fully believe in the stability of these figures. Most of BioTrack's customers joined us a long time ago. Some without further ado, others with lengthy negotiations, during which I looked into the eyes of their directors and said bluntly, "Yes, I know how everything worked. And I know how it will be better now." They believed. And they walked. The system that we built from scratch is not a copy of the old one, but its development, a new stage in which all the lessons learned, all the pains, worries, and miscalculations were intertwined. I've discarded some elements that I previously considered inviolable, and added those that previously seemed like excesses. Architecture now resembled a living organism. It not only coped with the load, but it adapted, breathed, and learned. Jamie and Zach are sitting 2 floors down in the command area, where there are no closed doors. They both became more than just colleagues. Zach now leads the development team, and it seems that he's only getting calmer and deeper over the years. His approach to coding is more like meditation. Jamie is amazing. After what she had to go through at BioTrack, I thought she was going to break down. But she not only persevered, she found a new quality in herself, calm confidence. I can discuss architectural solutions with her without chewing over the details. She hears the meaning behind the structure. And then there's Heather. Yes, that's the one. At the interview at Metasphere, she sat staring at the floor, afraid that someone would disappoint her expectations again. But when I insisted that they take her, without reservations, without let's see, she raised her head. And from that moment on, she never lowered it again. She is currently responsible for monitoring and diagnostics. And it is she who was the first to notice the slightest deviations in the system, before they have time to become errors. Her gut feeling has become an important part of our resilience. And I'm proud that I once believed in her when it seemed like a risk. A notification flashes on the laptop screen, the anniversary of the team. Dinner is at 6:30 p.m. We are waiting for you. It's not just a reminder. It's a symbol. It's been 1 year since we started all over again here. Not because they wanted revenge, not to prove anything to anyone, but because they knew how else to do it. Better. Be honest. My new diagnostic system has just confirmed that all verification cycles have been completed. No mistakes. No lag. No alarm flags. At first glance, these are dry statistics, numbers, and percentages. But for me, it's the breadth of all our work. This is a confirmation that the code is working correctly, that the architecture is holding up, that the foundation, laid not out of a desire to save money, but out of a desire for sustainability, did not fail. I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself to close my eyes for a moment. A memory flashes through my mind, the last time I left the BioTrack office. An empty hallway. Blake's pale face. Victoria, pursing her lips into a thin line. Those who tried to beat the system became its victims themselves. BioTrack was absorbed by another player in the market, not because I wanted revenge, but because their approach turned out to be weak. The customers are gone. Trust collapsed. The reputation has disappeared. I wasn't taking revenge on anyone. I was just doing my job. Conscientiously. With the same stubbornness with which she defended a complex system for years from those who considered verification an excess. With the same patience with which she explained why she couldn't just reset the base. With the same respect for detail that has always put results ahead of ambitions. There was a soft knock on my office door. I turned around and Jamie looked inside. Everything is ready for dinner. The team is already gathering. I smiled. She reached for the jacket hanging on the back of the chair and stood up. I'm coming now. We went out together. There was that rare, warm silence in the elevator when no words were needed. It's just a feeling that you're not alone. That you're among your own people. The others were waiting for us downstairs: Heather, Zach, analysts, junior developers, even a few new interns whom we hired a month ago. Someone brought a cake. Someone is a vinyl record player with records that I recognized from the first notes. I looked at these people and realized, this is not just a team. This is the result. This is my new architecture. Not only technical, but human. Some will say that all this is a consequence of luck. That I was just lucky to be in the right place at the right time. Let them think what they want. All I know is that this story was never about revenge. It was about the truth. About professionalism. About those who are not looking for easy solutions, but build reliable ones. I raised my glass, not to toast, just like that. As a sign. For a new chapter. For those who do the right thing. For those who stand behind the system. And who knows what it's worth to keep her.